Well, Nick, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for being on our podcast with us. Our podcast is named The Call. Our program is ALERT, Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training. We provide training to first responders across the country, first responders, military guys, government groups, whoever's looking for training. We started out training people on how to respond to active attack, active shooter incidents. And we've got a huge array of what's declared the national standard classes. So we've been pushing that out here. Thank you for sitting down with us. We're at the Texas Tactical Police Officers Association conference in Dallas, Texas. And you guys are bringing, you're bringing a product, well, I say a service to the guys that really need it. We don't really talk about this a lot. So I'll go on and on saying thank you over and over again. And we spoke about this in the conference hall. One of the biggest disqualifiers in any police department across the country for guys trying or applicants trying to get into any department is bad credit. Yep. So one of the things that people don't offer is good financial advice once they become employees of that department. So that's the direction we're going to head with this podcast. But what I want to cover at first is I want to give you the chance to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, where you came from.
So honored to be here, and thanks for having me. And I got involved in the financial wellness space because when I came into law enforcement in 2003, I had done a lot of stupid stuff with money, which qualified me as a rookie. I had come into law enforcement. I had had a little bit of an addiction with car stereo equipment, and I had amassed a debt of about $80,000. 30 of that was in credit card debt on car stereo equipment.
Awesome.
And I was very, very fortunate. I had a veteran officer that when I got released from training was my beat partner. He's a 20-year vet, still one of my best friends to this day. And he was that guy that would go car to car and say, hey, rookie, you're doing stupid stuff with money. You've got to stop this stuff. And fortunate enough to find the Dave Ramsey program and read his book and figured out how to get out of my mess I'd built. And over the next 24 months, I worked a little over 1,000 hours of overtime, sold a bunch of stuff. And on March 3rd, 2007, me and my wife paid our last official consumer debt. And so we've been officially credit card debt, consumer debt free for over 14 years. And then fast forward to 2011, we got a new chief named Steve Dye, and he came on board and he heard about the Dave Nerd downstairs and said, hey, I want you to start teaching the officers about this stuff. And before you knew it, I was getting asked to teach cops from all across the country. And it's kind of unique what we teach in that we teach financial wellness, but we teach it from a perspective of we're not the shirt and ties, the corporate folks that come in and say, you got to do this and this and that with your money. It's hey, I've been there. I've walked in your shoes. I've done dumb with zeros at the end of it. I had to work overtime to pay my bills. And this is how we overcame that. And these are the lessons we learned. And these are the things we can do as cops to better ourselves when it comes to our financial wellness.
So growing up, what did you see as far as financial responsibility? Were your parents real strict on finances, or how did that go in your family?
No, it's one of the biggest issues when it comes to money is, you talk about, I always ask the question to my cops. I'm like, why do we not talk about money? Well, there's two reasons. One, it's taboo. I mean, nobody wants to talk about cop. If you always joke around and say, if you suck with your money, you don't want to tell other cops that because you suck with your money. If you're good with your money, you don't want to tell anybody about that because then everybody expects you to buy lunch every day, right? And so it's that we don't talk about this as a family. And growing up, I mean, my middle class neighborhood, my parents worked their butts off. My dad was a paint contractor. My mom worked in retail, and they provided everything they could for us, but we didn't live a life of luxury. But more importantly, they never talked about money to us. And I didn't learn about money until I started making a lot of money. I was making about 48 grand selling senior trips at the age of 19. And I always tell people what happens when you make 48 grand in 1999 as a 19-year-old, you do stupid stuff with money. It's no different than our rookies. I mean, you talk about we're here in North Texas right now. The average first responder coming to an agency right now, they're going to make $60,000 a year. We're giving these kids more money than they've ever made in their entire life. And it's no wonder they go out and they buy the guns, they buy the cars, and they, I was joking around the FTO starter pack. You get through a training, you got to buy a gun, you got to get a tattoo, you got to date a nurse or a teacher usually, and we're broke, right? It's because we don't teach anybody about this stuff.
That's standard package, man. I love that. I love the fact that everybody, it doesn't matter where you go across the country, we all have the same starter pack.
Yep.
So what's the coolest thing that you bought when you started making a lot of money?
So my last stereo was a $21,000 competitive car audio stereo. It was a 2001 Honda Accord Coupe. It had 17 speakers in it. And you couldn't see any of them. I competed nationally, and I always say I wish I had competed in how loud you can make your car, because that's pretty cheap. I competed in sound quality, how realistic you can make your car sound.
Wow.
And it was the coolest stereo in the world, but it destroyed the car. I got nothing back when I ripped it out, and it financially almost ruined me, to the point where at the time, if I didn't work 20, 30 hours of overtime a week, I didn't pay my bills. And so I look back and it was cool, but hindsight, it wasn't as cool as I thought it was looking back at it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a decision you'd change going back. So there's a lot of discussion out in the world right now, and we're going to come back to the finances side of things. But you and me were having a discussion earlier about how you're helping and how you're impacting people that are suffering. So we talk a lot about in the industry. We're talking a lot about resiliency and mental health. So kind of outline what we were talking about earlier, how you're giving back to the people that really need it.
Yep. So I ended up becoming a Dave Ramsey certified master coach, which just means I've been trained by the Dave team to do intensive one-on-one coaching. And, I not only do we do coaching, we obviously do the financial wellness training. I also own a private financial firm in that sense. And we've always taken a very big financial wellness approach to things. And in other words, for lack of a better word, you got to take care of the little guy. It's not about trying to go out there and make a bunch of money. It's about doing what's right to our brothers and sisters. And so right now, if you call a lot of the major PTSD suicide groups in this country, so if you call Safe Call Now, which reports has partnered up with serveandprotect.org, or Copline, even some of the associations, and you're in financial crisis, my team will actually get called in to help with that, and we'll coach those first responders through that financial crisis 100% free. Unfortunately, we get involved with the suicides, which we know is just it's a pandemic out there for us when it comes to that, in essence. And I get asked sometimes, why are you so involved in the PTSD suicide movement? Well, the unfortunate thing is, when you talk about suicides in America, the top two reasons given for suicide: financial problems and relationships. Two things we don't do a good job at.
Right.
And I joke with my rookies and I say, we do a horrible job of preparing the rookies. We do an even worse job of preparing the spouses of the rookies for what they're about to experience. And, you take a first responder, we throw more money at them than they've ever made in their entire life. We completely change their mentality over the next year by putting them through an academy and then field training. And then, oh, by the way, let's put them on deep nights for the first time. Let's throw some kids into the mix. And next thing you know, we've got to work overtime, and we cause relationship problems because we're not home, because we're working overtime and working shift work. And then that causes the financial stress, and then it just becomes a recipe for disaster going downhill.
Yeah, absolutely. Financial stress, I think, is probably one of the biggest stressors out there for anybody. And most people in our industry don't like to talk about any of the problems that we're having. We're horrible about that. So I guess in essence, you all become, although you all are financial counselors, you become a counselor of sorts to help ease people's pain.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest reliefs you can get, is when you're actually financially capable of living your life the way you want to. So for rookies coming on, fresh out of the academy, they're still not married, they still don't have kids. What's the number one thing you would recommend for them to do?
Ironically, it's the number one thing I would recommend the veteran, the mid-level, the chief, the millionaire, the person in debt up to their eyeballs. It's the thing that we hate to do the most, but it's the number one thing to get your finances in order. And it's the dreaded B word, the budget. Everything revolves around budgeting. And oftentimes when you start making a bunch of money, you get that false sense of security. I'm making a crap load of money, so I've got money to go do stuff. But if we're not tracking what we have coming in and going out, it can be all for naught. And we really practice and preach the every dollar budget method, where every dollar has a purpose and a place before the month begins, and you got to track it. And one of the things what we've really done is we've taken financial wellness, and I call it, we've copified it. We teach it in a manner in which it makes sense to us. And we're at a SWAT conference right now. When I teach budgets like SWAT, like a SWAT team. If you think about it, you're supposed to do that budget before the month begins. Well, what does that SWAT team do before they even walk out the door? They do an ops plan. What's the plan for this warrant? Where are we going? What's the house look like? What's my stack order? Who's breaching the door? Everything about that SWAT raid is planned out to a second. But the most important thing that SWAT team does is not the raid. It's when they get done, they go back and they do the after action plan. Did everything we think was going to go according to plan, did it actually go according to plan, or do we need to adjust it? And that's all a budget is doing your ops plan before the month begins and then doing your after action report throughout the month. Because if you don't know your budget, if you're getting over your skis, you're spending too much, well, not doing a budget is going to continue to snowball that downhill, and you're going to end up in debt, and the debt's going to get bigger and bigger. On the flip side, if you're doing really good with your money, but you're not budgeting, you're losing out on an opportunity to start, whether it's a 457 with your department, some kind of retirement plan, heck, just saving for a vacation. That opens that door to allow you to plan for that. So it's not the funnest topic to talk about, but it is the number one most crucial thing we got to do, and that's budgeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that everybody seems to be able to do, and it doesn't matter whether you're a street cop, a SWAT cop, a detective, everybody has really cool off-duty gigs.
Yep.
Man, there's so much money to be made if you're willing to work overtime. If you want to work a lot of hours, you can make money. Then we get into trouble coming back and taking care of our taxes and doing that. What's something that you recommend guys do when we're doing those things?
Yep. So the first thing I recommend is usually not the most popular thing. And at my department, and so I came from Grand Prairie Police Department in Texas, and we get to work unlimited overtime in the sense of we get to do unlimited traffic enforcement. And I always shook my head when I saw these guys signing up for part-time work because they're going in at the time making $30, $35 an hour. When I'm out there working overtime making $50 an hour, I'm not worrying about taxes because the city's taking it out and it's going to my pension on top of that. So if you've got city overtime and it's more than what your part-time job is, yeah, it may be a little bit more money, but man, if now you ain't got to worry about the taxes of that because the city's taking care of that or the county's taking care of that. If you are working part-time jobs where you are getting paid cash, first and foremost, report it. Yeah, a lot of people don't like to report it because the IRS may not catch you, but I promise you if they do, you're not going to have a lot of fun. But if you are getting cash jobs or you're the proverbial what's called a 1099 job, yeah, you've got to ensure that you're holding back at least 30 to 35% on average. I mean, everybody's tax is a little bit different, so obviously a CPA would be able to tell you what that is. But you got to factor in your income taxes. You got to factor in that you're going to pay self-employment taxes. So when you work for your department, they're paying half your Social Security and half your Medicare taxes out of that. That's not the case when you're 1099. So now you're paying that. It's about between 13 and 14% more on top of your income tax. That gets people in trouble all the time. They work a bunch of overtime and then they get the biggest tax bill and they're like, what am I going to do? And if we don't have the savings, we go back to debt. We cause the snowball to happen. So when you work that job, hold back that 30, 35% so that you make sure you've got the money for taxes.
So out of every $100 I make off duty, I really only get $65 to $70 out of it.
Welcome to the beauty that is the federal government.
That's adulthood right there.
The harder you work, the more they take, right?
Yeah, it is. So, and those are things that I don't remember being told when I came out of the academy, and I got jobs offered to me all the time. It was great. Now, luckily, I had a lot of city jobs, so I was able to. They were drawing taxes out, and it was good for me. So, we're talking about all the taxes and how you face all the off-duty gigs. So, is there a place that you all recommend that we shelter our money when we're doing stuff like if I have an off-duty gig that is strictly for saving money? Is it okay sitting in my savings account, or is there a better place for me to put it?
It depends. We're really kind of different from most people that do financial planning because most financial planners want you to put money in investments. That's because most financial planners are broke, i.e., if you don't invest with them, they don't make money. I always tell people there's a time and a place to invest and to start to shelter that money. But the first thing we've got to do with that money is if we've got money in savings, if we've got consumer debt, we need to be taking care of that first. People will call me all the time. They're like, Nick, I want to put some money into the stock market. I'm like, how much debt do you have? Nick, I didn't call you for debt advice. I called you for investment advice. Like, okay, I don't care. How much credit card do you have? I just got $5,000. It's not that much. Well, you mean to tell me you'd rather put money in the stock market and hope we make 10% this year when you could make 25% guaranteed if you paid your credit card off? Because that's what the interest rate is. Yeah. And, so after we get done with consumer debt, the second thing you need to be doing with that money is you need to be building up a 3 to 6 month emergency fund so that if you lost your job, you could take care of any kind of an emergency, or if the AC goes out, you can take care of that.
Or if the whole state freezes and there's no extra jobs.
We wrote an article about that last year about the impacts of COVID with first responders because we had all these departments that were freezing overtime, but then on top of that, we had all these spouses that were getting laid off. And we had a bunch of cops that were hurting last year because their overtime income got cut down and their spouses are laid off, and we don't have any savings, and we got a crap load of debt. And there goes your stress, money, relationships right there. And it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for how many years now?
I've been teaching financial wellness now, coming up on this year will be my 10th year of doing that. Financial planning coming on 5 years.
So I think on the instructor side, we've all seen the different changes in how things are done, how things are taught. We teach tactics. We teach a lot of response type of stuff. What is the change in training that you've seen coming out since you've started doing this? Has there been any big changes?
Unfortunately, when it comes to financial wellness, the only changes that occur in the training is what we do.
Right.
And it's just because there's really nobody out there doing what we're doing, especially on the national level. There's a few entities that are trying to do it. Unfortunately, they're more product driven, there's underlying tones of what they're trying to get you to buy from them in essence.
Sure.
The biggest thing that I would say change wise is just is the awareness. Getting cops to understand that it's okay to talk about this stuff, getting cops to understand that there are resources out there that can help them, that have walked in their shoes, and that if you've got issues with money or you don't have issues, you just need some, a tune-up in essence. There are good people out there that are fiduciary, they're required by law to do what's in the best interest for them, that can help you understand this stuff so that we're not doing it on our own. And we're starting to see more and more people get away from the way we used to get advice, which was we get advice from someone at the department that we think is doing really good with their money, and sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And so now we're getting those people going, hey, instead of going to those specific people, let's go out to the resources that we know that do this all the time and have the stuff that can help us get to where we need to get to.
That's awesome. So we've all had star students along the way, and we've all had instructors that helped us the most. Is there an instructor or a guy? Obviously, I know the model you're following. Is there somebody special along the way that really made that impact on you on the financial wellness side?
Yeah, Dave Ramsey. I mean, I know he's the guru in this sense.
Obviously.
But my rock bottom, and I tell people when it comes to if you're hurting with money and you're doing bad with money, you've got to get to the point where you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I remember coming home one day, I was tired. I just got done working my 8 hours in patrol, and it was about midnight. And I wasn't tired because I worked my 8 hours in patrol. I was tired because I worked 8 hours in patrol and 5 hours of overtime beforehand, and I did it every day almost. And I walked over to my kitchen table, and I had that moment where I said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's when I tallied up my bills, and I said, I figured out I was $80,000 in debt. And that mentor of mine and another officer at the department got me turned on to Dave Ramsey. I read that book and I went, wow, this stuff's actually easy. And that was my turning point. And I learned a lot from Dave. And of course, since then I've kind of developed some of my own stuff through my experience. But I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't really for what I learned from Dave. And to be honest with you, if I didn't have a chief as progressive as what Steve Dye was to say, you know what? We're going to take a leap and we're going to teach this to our officers about this.
So what's been the worst or saddest story that you've heard when people finally come to you and ask for help? Obviously, we're not going to use names in this, but what's been the hardest thing you've had to listen to?
The deaths, the personal ones from my own department, the suicides are the worst. And I tell you why they're the worst to take, because almost every time I've dealt with whether it's an in the line of duty death or a suicide or even just an officer that dies, a car accident or something like that, 90% of them don't have a will. And it's listening to the spouse and the struggles and hearing them tell me what's going on and knowing in my head how screwed they are. And, I've got a scenario that I work with. This was years ago where, of course, there's no life insurance in place. There was no will in place. The officer passed away. And the income's not there. It's a stay-at-home mom, and they're trying to figure out how to pay the bills. And unfortunately, they had absolutely no idea. They weren't involved in the budget. They didn't know passwords to get into bank accounts. And the biggest stress was they had 3 cars, and she goes, I can't make the car payments. And my second question was, well, is it duly owned by both of you? And she goes, no, the title's in his name. And my heart just sunk, because I knew right there was nothing she could do to get out of those cars until it went through probate, which was going to cost her more money that she didn't have. And so We have an entire section in our class called Will and Estate Planning and Legacy Go Bag Training, where how do you plan for that day? How do you organize those things so that if something happens to you, everybody knows where to go? But those are the saddest stories. It's sad because we lost an officer, but it's sad because I know what the family's about to go through in that scenario because we didn't prepare.
I gotcha. Yeah, those are definitely sad stories. They're hard to recover from emotionally, and people don't realize just how hard the financial part is. Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have a will, you need to have a will. And I guess common thinking when we're growing up, everybody was thinking it was his, and he passed away, so it should be mine now. And that's just not the case. There's a lot of legalities to everything. So, who has been your star student? Have you had any? And obviously, we're staying away from names. But what has been the biggest success story you've seen?
Nothing puts a smile on my face more than getting an email from somebody I taught 6 months, a year ago. And I've had them as much as 3-4 years ago where I'll just get a random email or a Facebook message. And one of the ones that comes to mind, I taught a student, and it was about 9 to 12 months after I taught, I got a Facebook messenger. And the first message said, "This was my debt when I went to your training at my department. This is where I'm at 9 months later." And it was 50% lower than where it was. And it was a significant number. Wow. And, followed by that, "Thank you for changing my life." And of course, I humbled and honored to get that. Of course, my response was, "I didn't change your life. You made the decision to change your life." But hearing those stories where people come back, I've had a couple that I've taught in the past that have come back and said, "Nick, you told me that I could become a millionaire. And guess what? I did. I used these principles, and we actually started winning with money and became millionaires as cops."
That is awesome. So I think in every podcast that we're doing, I ask everybody how they go about setting their standards. I know what my standard is. I keep my standards a certain way. How do you set your standards, or how do you help your clients set standards?
It's goal-oriented. We talk about, from a financial planning perspective, we talk about a financial plan like a puzzle. Everybody, when you talk about financial planning, we think investments, retirement accounts. What's our pension going to pay us? What's our 457 or 401k going to pay us? That's about the last thing that you need to focus on when it comes to financial planning. We need to make sure that all the puzzle pieces are in the right place, because it doesn't matter how good you've done with your retirement planning. If you don't have that budget taken care of, if you don't have that will taken care of, it can be all for naught. And so it's about making sure where you're at in your puzzle. Some people are going to be, actually everyone's going to be at a different place in their puzzle, but it's helping them organize it. And even the ones that think they're doing really good oftentimes have puzzle pieces out of place that they could hone in on and start to really build upon.
Cool. So I'm trying to think of other stuff that we've talked about already. Give us a little bit about your background. What was the first car you bought when you started making money?
It was this is what started it all. It was a beauty. It was a 1989 silver Ford Festiva. I like to call it my roller skate, or my bubble with roller skate wheels on it. And I say it's what started it all because as a teenager, I was working at a grocery store. It's ironic, we're at a SWAT conference. The best man at my wedding is here, and he's a sergeant. Me and him met at a grocery store working together. And I actually took the back seats out and put speakers in that bad boy. And I had a girlfriend at the time that made me a plaque that said "Basing Bubbles," because that's what I look like coming down the road. But those speakers is what started it all going downhill. Every car I had after that had a bigger and better speaker system in it.
So obviously, what I'm going to do this weekend, and most people are planning to do the same thing. I'm going to stop by the Valero on the way home, and I'm going to buy a lotto ticket. So if I win the Super Lotto tonight, what's the first thing that you recommend I do?
Make a copy of the ticket. This is what in those kinds of scenarios, it's very, very important to get a team together. When I say team, I'm not talking about a financial planner. I'm talking about wealth managers, people that are experienced dealing with high net worth people. And ironically, we've become kind of specialized in that because ironically, believe it or not, we have a lot of cops that are multi-millionaires. And so having a good financial planner, a good attorney, and most importantly, usually a CPA, and making sure that all three of those people are working together. And last but not least, it's the same thing if someone passes away. I give the same advice I'm about to give if you were to win the lottery. When you inherit a bunch of money, or you win a lottery and win a significant amount of money, sit on it for 6 months. Don't make big financial decisions. The emotions they're too raw. I mean, we've all seen the TV shows. Somebody wins $1 million or several $1 million and they're broke a couple of years later. Ironically, there's a lot of spouses of fallen officers that, I mean, they become millionaires because of the death benefits that don't have a lot of money a couple of years later. Sit on it for 6 months, get your team in place, and get ready for the vultures because they're going to come a-circling. The aunts and uncles you don't know, but more importantly, the people that have financial products that they can sell you that's the next latest and greatest. So get that team together, start to strategize. Don't tell anybody. If you're married, you can tell them, but don't tell anybody else because everything changes at that point.
So we talked a little bit about the saving for taxes when we're working our off-duty gigs. What about a lot of these guys are out making, they're creating their own LLCs and all that stuff. Is that important?
It's like for a side hustle job, something like that.
Right.
It depends. So we do a lot of business coaching for first responders, just as someone that was a first responder and created a business. And I've actually been talking to a couple of other very, very successful former cops that have built businesses about creating some kind of a mentorship program for them in that sense. I get asked this question a lot. Oftentimes we get ahead of our skis and we start to go into, let's form an LLC. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just need a sole proprietor. Again, that's where a team comes in place, making sure you've got a good financial planner. But in that scenario, making sure you've got a good CPA, because sometimes we'll get, again, ahead of where we need to be, and we spend a bunch of money to create an LLC or an S Corp or something like that. When we didn't need to spend that, we could have just left it as a sole proprietor and protected ourselves in other manners as well.
Awesome. All right. Moment of truth, Nick. Who are the people on your personal Mount Rushmore?
Ooh. Personal Mount Rushmore. People at my department are going to laugh at me when I say this, but Fran Nowak, he was that 20-year vet. And had he not been there as a role model, there's no way that I would have been able to get to where I'm at today. My family, I love my mom to death, but I probably would put my stepfather on there just because when I say father, he is my father because the other person is my sperm donor. My stepfather stepped in when I was 3 years old and became my father that I wasn't going to have in essence. And so that would be bar none on there as well.
Awesome. That's pretty deep. Casey, you have anything you want to add in or ask him?
No, Nick, I really appreciate you being here, taking this on short notice since our booths are right next to each other. I do want to apologize to our viewers and or listeners with all the echoing going on in here. We are at the TTPLA conference. So if they called your winning ticket number, congratulations if you were listening at the time. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Eddie, if you don't have anything else, Nick.
Actually, Nick, you have any closing thoughts for us?
I do. I just, because I am a financial advisor and I'm governed by the SEC, I have a fun little disclosure. I got to, you know how that goes and that stuff. So the views expressed by myself are for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to buy or sell securities. Additionally, this class is not designed to advise you on how to handle anything specific with your finances, nor will listening to my advice guarantee your financial success. My opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and don't take into account your particular investment objectives. Neither IFP Advisors, IFP Securities LLC, doing business as independent financial partners, nor their affiliates offer tax or legal advice. Interested parties are strongly encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax and or legal expert regarding the best options for your particular circumstance. Investment advice is offered through IFP Advisors LLC, and we are a registered investment advisor. IFP is not affiliated with Financial Cop. I need to learn how to read that fast like the commercial guys do.
That's awesome. We have put all that on a T-shirt. You can just wear that around.
There you go. That works for me. Less reading for me.
Casey, you want to close us out?
Hey, visit us at alert.org. That's ALERRT.org. For any questions, comments, or concerns about the podcast, we are at thecall@alert.org. And with that, we are out.